He served in the military for a full 10 years, but just as he was about to be discharged, he chose to flee this so-called equal and friendly country. Every night after his comrades had fallen asleep, George would quietly slip out of the dorm, then sprint as fast as he could to the mess hall. Hidden inside a ventilation duct were the map and compass he had stashed away. Then he would crawl through a tunnel he had dug in advance to get past the electric fence. Under the cover of darkness, he ran desperately toward the south, until he reached the forbidden zone marked minefield. He only had 30 minutes each night. George used a dagger to probe for the position of each landmine, marking them both on the ground and on his map. By the time he was done, he was drenched in sweat, but as he looked at the border not far away, he could almost taste freedom in the air. Suddenly, a landmine exploded. George thought he had been discovered, and immediately dropped flat to the ground. At that moment, his stopwatch suddenly went off. His time was up. He had no time to figure out what caused the explosion. He only wanted to get back to camp before anyone noticed. When he saw his teammates still asleep, George finally lay down in relief. Today, he had moved one step closer to South Korea. The next day during training, a soldier suddenly said he smelled rust in the air, a sign that a heavy storm was coming. Once it rained, the markers on the landmines would shift. George couldn't help but feel anxious. Just then, another explosion rang out. A wild boar had wandered into the minefield, and the horrific scene before him made him realize that staying here meant he could die like that at any moment. It only strengthened George's resolve to escape. That night, as squad leader, George cooked himself, and everyone finally got to eat meat again. But when the commanding officer arrived, the feast came to an abrupt end. In the office, George carefully explained that due to a shortage of supplies, 15 soldiers had recently become malnourished. And according to the Supreme Commander's directive, the troops were supposed to eat meat freely, so he hadn't reported the wild boar. Fortunately, his explanation was accepted by his superiors.
이 와중에 우리 임중사가 노력해오고 있지 않았네.
그럼 서대원들 영양 보충하겠습니다.
아니, 그게 뭐 또 순서라는 게 있지 않겠어?
Soon, this so-called nutrition supplement took on a different form. A group of senior officers sat around the table, drinking and eating meat, their faces filled with greed and frenzy. Rank and privilege ensured they got first access to everything. Even George became someone who served them. While no one was paying attention, George managed to hide a few pieces of pork, and after it was over, he gave them to his malnourished comrades. This only strengthened his determination. He decided to act before the storm arrived, but George didn't realize that his every move had already been noticed by a new recruit, John. John had only one request: to take him along. Escaping alone was already incredibly difficult. There was no way George could agree. To prevent him from reporting it, George kept a constant eye on John. That night, the alarm suddenly sounded, and everyone assembled quickly. Only then did George realize John was missing from his bunk. When he opened the ventilation duct, the map was gone, just as he feared. By the time George broke away and reached the fence, John was already gone. Just as George stood there at a loss, the squad behind him spotted him. George was arrested as a deserter. He said nothing and slowly closed his eyes. The path he had walked for countless nights seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness.